This Sunday, pressure campaign. Just 4 months to Election Day, a defiant President Biden vows he's staying in the race.
I am running and going to win again.
But as his poll numbers plummet and Democrats consider Vice President Harris at the top of the ticket, pressure is building for him to drop out.
I think it's a legitimate question to say, is this an episode or is this a condition?
He has to show that he can do the job. He does not have a lot of time.
Can the 81-year-old president reassure his party he's still fit to serve?
I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test. Everything I do.
I'll talk to Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California. Plus, power surge. The Supreme Court rules former presidents have immunity for all official acts, delaying Donald Trump's election interference case and postponing his sentencing in the New York hush money case.
If you don't have immunity, you just have a ceremonial president.
What will it mean for a potential second Trump term?
I know I will respect the limits of the presidential powers I have for 3.5 years. But any president, including Donald Trump, will now be free to ignore the law.
I'll talk to Republican Senator JD Vance of Ohio, a potential Trump running mate. Joining me for insight and analysis are NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli, Amy Walter, editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report, former Democratic Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy, and Republican strategist Matt Gorman. Welcome to Sunday. It's Meet the Press.
From NBC News in Washington, the longest-running show in television history, this is Meet the Press with Kristen Welker.
Good Sunday morning. President Biden is in an all-out effort to revive his candidacy after that debate performance last week that raised questions about whether he's capable of beating Donald Trump and serving another 4 years in office. One veteran House Democrat tells NBC News opinions are hardening in many quarters, that action has to be taken, and that action is a different nominee. Both House Democratic leader Hakeem Jeffries and Virginia Senator Mark Warner are convening groups of their colleagues to discuss the path forward, and a growing number of congressional Democrats have called on President Biden to step aside.
Mr. President, please look at what's happened, recognize that the reality out there may not be the same thing you're hearing from the circle of your closest friends and family, and consider putting our country first.
The campaign has been very, I think, arrogant in their response. We want to know what their plan is to win this election and turn these numbers around. And if they don't have a plan, then I think we have to move in a different direction.
It's like talking to a loved one about such a tough situation. How do you tell that person he can't do this anymore?
The decision about whether Mr. Biden stays in the race may come down to raw data. In a new Wall Street Journal poll, former President Trump has opened up a 6-point lead over President Biden among registered voters, the widest gap in that survey since 2021. Mr. Trump leads by nearly 9 points among registered voters in a New York Times Siena College poll. He's up by 6 points among likely voters, his largest lead since 2015. And Vice President Harris performs slightly better in a CNN poll, within the margin of error. But a Bloomberg Morning Consult poll shows a close race in key battleground states. Now, an increasing number of big Democratic donors are calling on President Biden to drop out.
The lifeblood to a campaign in politics, the lifeblood is money. I talked to a bunch of big donors, and they're moving all their money to Congress and the Senate. I cannot believe we're in this situation.
But the president has been defiant. He is not dropping out. On the trail in Wisconsin and in an exclusive interview with ABC's George Stephanopoulos, President Biden insisted only the Lord Almighty could make him change his mind.
If the Lord Almighty came out and said, Joe, get out of the race, I'll get out of the race. The Lord Almighty's not coming down.
I agree that the Lord Almighty is not going to come down. But if you are told reliably from your allies, from your friends and supporters in the Democratic Party, in the House and the Senate, that they're concerned you're going to lose the House and the Senate if you stay in, what will you do?
I'm not going to answer that question. It's not going to happen.
But the interview did not calm the widespread panic throughout the party. Former Obama senior advisor David Axelrod said President Biden is rightfully proud of his record, but is, quote, dangerously out of touch with the concerns people have about his capacities. Some Democrats have also expressed frustration that the president refused to commit to taking a cognitive test.
Have you had the specific cognitive tests, and have you had a neurologist, a specialist, do an examination?
No, no one said I had to. No one said, they said I'm good.
Would you be willing to undergo an independent medical evaluation that included neurological and cognitive tests and release the results to the American people?
Look, I have a cognitive test every single day. Every day I have that test. Everything I do.
The answer right now is no, you don't want to do that right now.
No, I've already done it.
On Monday, the Supreme Court gave former President Donald Trump a monumental legal victory, granting him sweeping immunity from prosecution over official actions in an extraordinary expansion of executive power. Aiming to capitalize on that, the Biden campaign is now arguing the decision is added proof that Mr. Trump will be more dangerous in a second term.
If you stay in and Trump is elected and everything you're warning about comes to pass, how will you feel in January?
I feel as long as I gave it my all and I did the good job as I know I can do. That's what this is about.
And joining me now is Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California, a candidate for Senate. Congressman Schiff, welcome back to Meet the Press. Thank you for being here.
Great to be with you.
It is great to have you here. I want to get your gut reaction to that interview on Friday night. Obviously, the president trying to turn the page. Based on what you saw, do you think he is still the strongest candidate to beat former President Trump?
Well, ultimately, this is a decision President Biden is going to have to make, and President Biden alone. But I would say this, he has been an extraordinary president. He has created millions and millions of jobs. He has expanded and strengthened our NATO alliances. He has brought back manufacturing in this country. He has brought about the most aggressive attack on climate change. He has done more in one term than most presidents ever do, no matter how many terms they get. And he's running against someone who's a pathological liar, someone who ran the country into the ground by his mishandling of a deadly pandemic, someone who is a pathological, not only a pathological liar, but is immoral, indecent, unfit for office. But the performance on the debate stage, I think, rightfully raised questions among the American people about whether the president has the vigor to defeat Donald Trump. And this is an existential race. Given Joe Biden's incredible record, given Donald Trump's terrible record, he should be mopping the floor with Donald Trump. Joe Biden is running against a criminal. It should not be even close, and there's only one reason it is close, and that's the president's age. And what I would say, Kristen, what I would advise the president is seek out the opinions of people you trust. He's obviously talked to his family about this, and that's important. But he should seek out people with some distance and objectivity. He should seek out pollsters who are not his own pollsters. He should take a moment to make the best informed judgment. And if the judgment is run, then run hard and beat that SOB.
Congressman, what is your opinion? I mean, you watched that interview on Friday, and a lot of Democrats say it was fine. He certainly seemed stronger, more robust than during the debate, but it didn't put concerns to rest. Are you confident he can beat Donald Trump, or do you think he should drop out of the race?
The interview didn't put concerns to rest. No single interview is going to do that. And what I do think the president needs to decide is, can he put those concerns aside? Can he demonstrate to the American people that what happened on the debate stage was an aberration, that he can and will beat Donald Trump? Given this Supreme Court decision now essentially making any future Trump a dictator and a king, it's all the more important. But here's the thing. I think if the president takes the time to consult people and has an open mind about this, he will do what Joe Biden always does, which is he will make the right decision. He'll make the decision in the best interests of the country. That's what he has always done, and I'm confident that's what he will do here.
You heard Nancy Pelosi say that it's legitimate to ask, was this an episode or a condition? President Biden refused to commit to take a cognitive test. Do you think he should take a cognitive test?
Look, I'd be happy if both the president and Donald Trump took cognitive tests.
So that's a yes. You think he should take a cognitive test?
I think they both should be willing to take a test. I think, frankly, a test would show Donald Trump has serious illness of one kind or another. But ultimately, the decision is going to come down to what Joe Biden thinks is best. And And if his decision is to run, then run hard and beat that SOB. And if his decision is to pass the torch, then the president should do everything in his power to make that other candidate successful.
And let me ask you about next steps, because obviously there are going to be meetings on Capitol Hill. Leader Jeffries, Mark Warner, concerned about down ballot races. Are Democrats in trouble with Joe Biden at the top of the ticket?
Look, there are concerns with the impact on down ballot races if the president doesn't do well.
Is he dragging down ballot races as we speak?
You know, at present, our down ballot candidates in the Senate and House are doing well. They're all ahead. They are running well ahead of the president. But you can only run so far ahead of the president. And so obviously Joe Biden is going to need to consider, for his own sake and his own legacy, can he beat Donald Trump? He's the best to beat Donald Trump. But also the profound impact this decision, maybe the most important of his presidency, will have on the House, on the Senate, on the future of the country.
You know, Congressman, when I talked to Democrats, one of the exchanges that frustrated the most from that interview on Friday was when he was asked what happens if you lose. President Biden said it's about whether he gave it his all. Is that what it's about? Is that answer satisfying to you?
No, that is the answer that most concerned me as well. This is not just about whether he gave it the best college try, but rather whether he made the right decision to run or to pass the torch. That is the most important decision for him to make right now. This is about whether this country remains a democracy, whether we veer off into some kind of pseudo-dictatorship. Everything is riding on this. And I know people feel an urgency. I feel an urgency, but I would tell the president, slow down and take the time to make the right decision here. That's best for the country, and I believe he will.
You laid out the stakes right before the debate. You noted that the country is divided. This will be a close election, as it was back in 2020. I want to play a little bit of what you said.
You can't discount the chance that if he loses again, when he loses again, that he will go to even greater lengths to try to overturn the results. The only remedy really is the one in all of our hands, and that is to make sure that Joe Biden wins overwhelmingly, that this is not close.
Congressman, overwhelmingly, can President Biden win overwhelmingly by any stretch at this point?
Either he has to win overwhelmingly or he has to pass the torch to someone who can't. It's as simple as that, because what the Supreme Court did in that decision was give the next occupant of that office, whether it's Joe Biden or anyone else, nearly dictatorial power.
Yeah, I want to ask you about that coming up, but let me very quickly ask you about the vice president. You saw the polling. One poll shows her doing better against former President Trump. Do you think she's a stronger candidate to take on Donald Trump?
I think the vice president would be a phenomenal president. I think she has the experience, the judgment, the leadership ability to be an extraordinary president.
Could she win overwhelmingly, Congressman?
I think she very well could win overwhelmingly, but before we get into a decision about who else it should be, the president needs to make the decision whether it's him. I don't want to get into a debate. I don't think it's good for the party to get into a debate over, okay, if not him, then whom, but rather let's focus on the fundamental decision.
I want to get to immunity. How quickly does he have to make this decision, though? The next week, the next 10 days?
It needs to be made promptly, but frankly, more important than speed is getting it right.
Let me ask you about the immunity decision. In the past, Mr. Trump has accused you personally of fraud and treason. He's called for members of the January 6th committee to be indicted, as you know. Are you personally concerned about the former president's threats against you should he be reelected?
Of course. I think anyone who's on his enemies list should be concerned. Because
what scares you most? What concerns you most?
Well, what concerns me the most is what the court just did was to basically tell Donald Trump, you can do anything through the Justice Department. You can do anything through the military. These are core responsibilities of the President of the United States. You will have unquestioned immunity for whatever you do. And even outside of that, you will have such a strong presumption of immunity as to be irrebuttable. Donald Trump already had very few guardrails. All the people of stature, the Secretary Mattis's and others, he drove out, replaced them with utter sycophants. He would start with the utter sycophants, and he would start with no guardrails whatsoever. He was talking about bringing Liz Cheney up before a military tribunal. If there's anything that should show the American people that he is unfit to be president, it's statements like this.
Very quickly, given those high stakes, should President Biden drop out and pass the torch to Vice President Kamala Harris or someone else who you believe could win overwhelmingly?
I think Joe Biden should take the time, talk to people outside of his immediate circle, talk to people he respects, people with objectivity, people with distance, and make the right decision for the country. And I'm confident Joe Biden has always made the decision in the best interest of the country. It is the fundamental distinction between he and Donald Trump. Donald Trump, you can always count on to do what's best for Donald Trump. But Joe Biden, you can count on to do what's right for the country.
All right. Congressman Adam Schiff, thank you so much for joining us. We really appreciate it. Good to have you here in studio. When we come back, Republican Senator JD Vance of Ohio, a potential Trump running mate, joins me next. Welcome back. In a landmark decision this week, the Supreme Court ruled former presidents have immunity for their official acts, dealing a blow to the special counsel's 2020 election interference case. Chief Justice John Roberts, writing for the majority, quote, "The president is not above the law, but under our system of separated powers, the president may not be prosecuted for exercising his core constitutional powers." In a scathing dissent, Justice Sotomayor wrote that the ruling effectively creates a law-free zone around the presidency, writing, "In every use of official power, the president is now a king above the law." Joining me now is Senator JD Vance, a top finalist to be former President Trump's running mate. Senator Vance, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for being here. I want to talk to you about the immunity ruling and the implications. This is what Donald Trump said last year about wanting to target his political opponents. Take a listen.
I will appoint a real special prosecutor to go after the most corrupt president in the history of the United States of America, Joe Biden, and the entire Biden crime family.
Senator, if former President Trump were to win, if you were to be his vice president, would you support him appointing a special prosecutor to go after his political enemies, the Bidens?
Well, first of all, Kristen, I find it interesting how much the media and the Democrats have lost their mind over this particular quote. Donald Trump is talking about appointing a special prosecutor to investigate Joe Biden for wrongdoing. Joe Biden has done exactly that for the last few years and has done far more in addition to that to engage in a campaign of lawfare against his political opposition. I think what Donald Trump is simply saying is we ought to investigate the prior administration. There are obviously many instances of wrongdoing. The House Oversight Committee has identified a number of corrupt business transactions that may or may not be criminal. Of course, you have to investigate to find out. So I think Donald Trump saying, look, let's do the basic work of investigating wrongdoing is a totally reasonable thing for him to do. And frankly, the Biden administration has done far worse. So if you think that what Donald Trump is proposing is a threat to democracy, isn't what Biden has already done a massive threat to our system of law and government?
Senator, just to be very clear, though, Joe Biden didn't appoint a special prosecutor. The Attorney General did that. Trump was indicted by grand juries. He was found guilty by a jury of his peers in New York. But can we just go back to the core question here? Would you support him taking such an action? It sounds like you're saying, yes, you would.
I would absolutely support investigating prior wrongdoing by our government. Absolutely. That's what you have to have in a system of law and order, Kristen. But I have to reject the premise here. Joe Biden appointed the Attorney General, Merrick Garland, who, of course, answers to Joe Biden, can be fired by Joe Biden. So the idea that the Biden administration has nothing to do with the appointment of the special prosecutor, I think, completely betrays a misunderstanding of how our system of government actually works. And of course, Kristen, we have to make this point, Kristen, that the prosecution of Donald Trump in New York, which I think now is fundamentally been thrown in doubt by this immunity case, it was one of the main guys was a Department of Justice official in the Biden administration who jumped ship to join a local prosecutor's office to go after Donald Trump.
And yet the DOJ
if that
told
doesn't make you question the legitimacy of the prosecution, that's a problem.
Well, Senator, that happens all the time. People are appointed from Washington, but the DOJ told Congress, testified this week
Kristen,
that it reviewed
it happens.
Hold on, Senator,
are you really
finish.
saying, Kristen?
Senator, let me finish my sentence.
All
then
the time
I'll let you finish. Hold on.
The number.
Let me just finish this. The DOJ told Congress this week it reviewed all communications since Biden took office and found no contact between federal prosecutors and those involved with that case in New York. Can you stick to the substance of the question, though? Let me just ask, because I just want to stick with this line of theory that you are laying out, which is you are saying it's not okay for Joe Biden to weaponize the Justice Department. If it's not okay for Joe Biden to weaponize the Justice Department, as you say, which there's no evidence of that, why is it okay for Donald Trump to do that?
Well, Kristen, first of all, you said that it happens all the time, that the number 3 person in the Department of Justice jumps ship to join a local prosecutor's office to go after the president's political opponent. I don't think that's ever happened in the history of American democracy, and I don't think that we should legitimize it. Now, if Donald Trump's attorney general had his number 2 or his number 3 jump ship to a local prosecutor's office in Ohio or Wisconsin, and that person then went after Donald Trump's political opposition, that's a different conversation.
Senator,
all he's suggesting is that we should investigate credible arguments of wrongdoing. That's all that Donald Trump is saying. That is not a threat to democracy. That's merely reinforcing our system of law and government.
Bottom line, you are okay with Donald Trump appointing a special prosecutor to go after his political enemies, which would include Joe Biden. You're just, to button that up, it sounds like you're saying yes. Let me move on, though, to my next question. I want to talk to you about the Heritage Foundation. It's a conservative think tank in Washington. It shapes the agenda they would like to see in a Trump second term. The president said this after the Supreme Court's ruling this week. Take a look.
We're in the process of taking this country back. No one in the audience should be despairing. No one should be discouraged. We ought to be really encouraged by what happened yesterday. We are in the process of the Second American Revolution, which will remain bloodless if the left allows it to be.
Do you support those calls for a revolution, and would political violence ever be justified?
Well, of course, political violence is never justified, Kristen. You'll have to ask the president of the Heritage Foundation to defend his remarks if you'd like to do that. I will say, look, the Heritage Foundation does a lot of good work. It does a lot of things that I disagree with, a lot of things that I agree with. But the Heritage Foundation is a nonprofit organization that works on public policy, and I think it's an important part of how D.C. functions and operates. We'll continue to have important conversations in the Republican Party with a whole host of think tanks from the right and from the left as we craft public policy. That's the way the city works. And again, I'm not going to be the person who serves as the spokesperson for the Heritage Foundation. I don't have any affiliation.
Sounds like you're distancing yourself from those comments, that talk of political violence.
Look, Kristen, I certainly don't think political violence is justified. That's certainly actually not what I think that Kevin Roberts was saying to begin with. But again, have him on your program to defend what he said, and I think that's the best thing to do.
Let me ask you specifically about Project 2025 for our viewers so that they know. It's basically a policy blueprint for a second Trump presidency. It's supported by the Heritage Foundation and other conservative groups. The Biden campaign has said Project 25, quote, should scare every single American. It would give Trump limitless power over our daily lives. Among the things they are calling for is reversing approval of the abortion pill, mifepristone. But Donald Trump says he supports access to that pill, actually. Do you support access to abortion medication as Donald Trump does?
Well, Kristen, you asked about Project 2025, and I want to be clear here. That Trump explicitly has said his own transition team runs the Trump transition and will run the Trump administration. Again, you have a whole host of organizations, some of which have good ideas, some of which have bad ideas, and some of which have both. And I'm sure the Trump administration will talk to a lot of people as it's crafting an agenda to bring back American manufacturing jobs, to lower inflation, and to bring peace and prosperity back to the world. That's the whole reason why me and so many others are trying to reelect Donald Trump, is because the agenda actually worked. It was his agenda, and I think it'll work again for the American people. On the question of the abortion pill, what so many of us have said is that, look, we certainly don't. The Supreme Court made a decision saying that the American people should have access to that medication. Donald Trump has supported that opinion. I support that opinion. I think it's important to say that we actually have to have an important conversation in this country about what our abortion policy should be. Donald Trump is the pragmatic leader here. He's saying most abortion policy is going to be decided by the states. We want to make it easier and more affordable for young women and parents to have families to begin with. We want to lower housing costs, eliminate those surprise medical bills that so many families see after they have a baby. That's the Trump and Republican approach to this issue. Meanwhile, Joe Biden wants taxpayer-funded abortion up to the moment of birth. It's so crazy to me how the Democrats frame this as Republicans. Just let me finish, Kristen. They frame Democrats as being reasonable and pragmatic, when in reality, Republicans are the one trying to find some common ground here.
As you know, very few abortions take place later in pregnancy, and almost always because there is a medical emergency. I know Trump is trying to distance himself from Project 2025, but we have to point out that a number of people who are involved with it are former Trump officials: Ben Carson, Peter Navarro, Russ Vought, and others. But just to be clear, you support mifepristone being accessible?
Yes, Kristen, I do. But again, on the Project 2025 issue, what the media and the Democrats are trying to do is attach its most unpopular elements to the Trump administration. It's a 900-page document. I guarantee there are things that Trump likes and dislikes about that 900-page document, but he is the person who will determine the agenda of the next administration. All he said very explicitly is, I am in charge of the next administration because I'm the person running for president. It's just important to make that clarification.
Let me ask you something that caught our eye. This is something you wrote in the New York Times op-ed in 2017 about former President Barack Obama. You criticized his policies, but you also said, quote, "It is one of the great failures of recent political history that the Republican Party was too often unable to disconnect legitimate political disagreements from the fact that the president himself is an admirable man. For at a pivotal time in my life, Barack Obama gave me hope that a boy who grew up like me could still achieve the most important of my dreams. For that," you write, "I will miss him and the example he set." You wrote that just days before Donald Trump was inaugurated. Do you still consider Barack Obama to be an admirable man who you miss?
Well, you know, I grew up in a broken family, Kristen, and I just wanted to be a good husband and dad. And certainly Barack Obama, despite my many political disagreements with him, he's clearly a good husband and a father. By the way, I'd say the same thing about Donald Trump, whose children love him. And I think this is one of the things the media often misses about Trump, is how genuinely devoted he is to his family, to his grandchildren, and how part of his pro-life messaging, his fundamental pro-life view, is that we ought to make it easier for more American families to have those thriving children and thriving families. So certainly I think we've been blessed with a lot of good examples across our country. And yeah, absolutely. Was Barack Obama a good president? No. Was he a good husband and father? Yes.
So he's still an admirable man?
That's just what I said, Kristen. Absolutely.
All right. I have to ask you about Veep stakes. Of course, have you gotten the call from Donald Trump? Has he asked you to be his running mate?
I have not gotten the call, Kristen, and I'll certainly, you know, maybe not the first person that I'd let know if that happened, but we'll let the media know if I ever get that call. But most importantly, Kristen, we're just trying to work to elect Donald Trump. Whoever his vice president is, he's got a lot of good people he could choose from. It's the policies that worked and the leadership style that worked for the American people. I think we have to bring that back to the White House, and I'm fighting to try to do that.
Well, here we are about a week before the Republican convention. Before I let you go, can you say unequivocally, here and now, that you will accept the results of the 2024 election, no matter what they are?
So long as it's a free and fair election, Kristen, of course we will. We will use constitutional processes to challenge issues if we think there are issues. But if it's a free and fair election, we will do what the Constitution requires. We will respect the results, and I expect those results are going to be to re-elect Donald Trump.
It was a free and fair election in 2020. Donald Trump took his concerns to court. He lost in court, but he still has not conceded. Do you understand that when you refuse to commit unequivocally, that feeds into people's concerns, skepticism about the nation's electoral process?
Well, Kristen, I don't agree with that, actually. I think that feeding into people's concerns about our electoral process is that one half of America's political segment, they won't support legislation that makes it harder for illegal aliens to vote. They won't support universal voter ID in our elections, even though you have to present ID to do almost anything in this country. I think taking people's concerns seriously about election fraud is the way to reinforce security and confidence in our elections.
Yeah, Senator, it's already against the law for non-citizens to vote. But just on that very point, when others refuse to say, yes, we will accept the election results. Do you understand how that undermines people's confidence in the electoral system?
But Kristen, what I just said is I don't agree with that. What I think actually undermines people's confidence in the electoral system is when the media is incurious about obvious examples of problems in our electoral system. I think we've got great elections, but a lot of things could be better in certain states. I want to work to make that happen so the American people have greater confidence in their elections. That's what I'll keep doing.
Senator, thank you for being here. Please come back when you get that phone call, if not beforehand. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much. When we come back, President Biden is dismissing his critics and vowing to stay in the race even as more pressure grows for him to drop out. The panel is next. Welcome back. The panel is here. NBC News White House correspondent Mike Memoli, Amy Walter, editor-in-chief of the Cook Political Report, former Democratic Congresswoman Stephanie Murphy of Florida, and Matt Gorman, former senior communications advisor for Tim Scott for America. Thank you all for being here on what is ostensibly still a holiday weekend, but no holiday for us. Mike, I have to start with you. Take us inside Biden world, because you heard from Congressman Adam Schiff. There's still a lot of skepticism about his ability to beat Trump, and he's really trying to turn the page and quiet the skeptics.
Kristen, I covered that rally in Wisconsin on Friday, as I did the week before in North Carolina. We all watched that interview with George Stephanopoulos. The tone being set by President Biden and others in his inner circle is one of defiance. They are almost challenging the Democratic Party to take this nomination away from them. I shared with one senior advisor those newsmaking comments I thought from Congressman Schiff about the president, and they said this is not going to be decided by members of Congress. This is going to be decided by the voters. They really are framing this, and we're going to hear a lot more in the week ahead about the voters versus the pundits, voters versus the media, voters versus the establishment. This is Joe Biden, 50-year politician, establishment of the Democratic Party, if there ever was one, who is now running as an insurgent against his party. He's, though, one dose of reality that I've gotten is he's 100% in until he's 100% out. He has to be defined until the moment he's ready to step aside.
It's such a great way to frame it, Mike, because he has been such a part of the Democratic establishment for so long. Amy Walter, take us inside the numbers. Give us the reality check, because just to remind folks, at the top of the show, I laid out the fact that there has been erosion in the polling, and yet there is one poll that shows the battlegrounds are still close. Where are we right now in this race?
Well, Kristen, you know, I love me some polls.
I know
and
you
I love
do.
digging into data, but I want to step away from it because I think we really have to talk about the fundamentals, because sometimes I think we get caught up in the numbers. And the fundamentals today aren't any different than they were before this debate. And these are two unpopular people running against each other. The candidate who is in the spotlight, whose liabilities and flaws are in the spotlight, is the candidate who's most likely to lose. Joe Biden went into that debate with the spotlight on him. He wanted that debate to turn the spotlight back onto Donald Trump. Not only did he fail on doing that, but now the spotlight isn't just on his weaknesses as a president in terms of his policies. It's not just about inflation or immigration. Now it's about whether he can functionally do the job and whether he has the physical and cognitive ability to do that. And that is a very different fundamental that we've added to this fundamental problem for both candidates in this race. And the one other thing I'll say, the challenge of getting beyond this question, because it's not just, you know, earlier it was about, can you get beyond the frustration about the economy or about the border. Now it is about him personally, and when I see where the media is going to be for the next 4 months, it is going to be focused on every speech, every interview, any slip he makes is going to be highlighted and talked about.
Absolutely. And Stephanie, I mean, Amy hits the nail on the head with the level of concern, I think, that Democrats have in this moment. Take us inside some of your conversations. What is the reality check there? How concerned are lawmakers about down ballot races?
They are far more concerned privately than they have said publicly. I mean, it is
We've all gotten those
flat-out panic at this point. But, you know, if you look at it, and if the Biden administration says it's up to the voters, well, 3/4 of the voters in a very divided America agree on one thing, and it's that he doesn't have the mental acuity to go forward. And the Democratic caucus agrees that Trump 2.0 would be dangerous for democracy. And now they're also looking at the potential that there are going to be significant headwinds for a down ballot. And if we can't hold the House or the Senate, with the Supreme Court rulings that expand the president's powers, this puts democracy in a really precarious place. And if you believe that, then it's reasonable for you to ask the president to really consider whether or not he is the best candidate and to really consider the consequences of staying at the top of the ticket on the down ballot races.
That's really the disconnect, because President Biden, his campaign have argued Donald Trump's a threat to the democracy every single day. And if those are the stakes, can they risk this? I have to go to you because there is just growing pressure. Also for Republicans, as they watch this unfold. Donald Trump had this post yesterday where he seemed to sarcastically say Joe Biden should stay in the race. Is he worried? Are Republicans worried about what happens if Joe Biden gets out? If all of a sudden there's an infusion of excitement?
I mean, look, if Joe Biden stays in this race, to Amy's point, this race becomes about him entirely, his fitness for office, bar none. If it's Kamala, and I don't think there will be anyone other than Kamala, then this becomes much of the race we thought we were going to run 2 weeks ago. You know, it's the economy, immigration, crime, and she owns all of it. And I will also say this, one of the first questions she will have to answer is, what did you know about Joe Biden's condition? When did you know it? A lot of these stories coming out say that, you know, there's been some issues for about a year now, if not more. You're the one person in the government he can't fire. You mean to tell me you didn't see anything about it? She's going to have to answer that the first thing she says.
We should know, crime is one of the top issues for voters. It's also at a 50-year low right now. Mike, pick up on Matt's point. I mean, are there contingents? What are the conversations happening around the vice president?
Well, we have seen Vice President Harris have a much bigger role in the administration and in the campaign since the president announced he was running for re-election. We've seen that times 10 just in the past week. They have been very deliberate. They have been very intentional about having the vice president physically with the president in some cases, but also speaking out very supportive. You also have top advisors in the campaign who have been telling donors, putting forward these, what I was told were West Wing type scenarios of how Michelle Obama comes on the ticket or something. Listen, the most likely scenario.
There's been a lot of talk of Michelle Obama.
Oh my gosh.
The most likely scenario, the cleanest scenario, to the extent that there is one, is it's going to be the vice president. And there are a lot of Democrats who really like the idea of a Harris-Cooper ticket. Governor Cooper of North Carolina, two-term governor, 16-year attorney general. This is two prosecutors who, to your point, crime's a big issue, who could make the rest of the campaign about prosecuting the case against Donald Trump.
It kind of struck me. Adam Schiff said, yes, he thought the vice president could win overwhelmingly.
Look, I absolutely agree with Matt that she comes in with the same liabilities in some ways that Biden does, which is she's had to answer for the administration and all of the issues that people are frustrated about the economy and immigration. The question is, can she now, because she doesn't have the same challenges that the president does, change the conversation back to Donald Trump? Can she make this race about Donald Trump? Can she put together not necessarily the pro-Harris coalition, but that anti-Trump coalition that has been successful, not just in 2020, but in 2018 and in 2022?
Matt, who's the candidate who Republicans are most afraid of?
I mean, it's a different race, whether it's Biden or it's Harris. I mean, I think we look back and Republicans remember the kind of disastrous campaign she had in the Democratic primary. It seems like every other day there was a new health care position, a new position on marijuana. She hasn't proven to be an effective communicator on complex issues on a lot of different things. And look, she certainly would help the Democrats on Roe, but she owns the border lock, stock, and barrel.
One of the things I keep thinking about when I think about the vice president potentially running is Donald Trump back in 2020 saying she had the best announcement. What do you make potentially? Do you think she could win overwhelmingly? How are Democrats
I think she
doing?
should have consideration, but we shouldn't repeat the mistake that got us to this place, which was not to have a real primary. Primaries are a way to road test your candidates. And so if there's a way for us to have a real primary, it gives us the Democratic Party an option, and then it allows them to coalesce behind that person post-convention.
Is there? Go ahead.
Sorry,
Kristen. Political reporters have been talking for years about wanting to have a real political convention, a brokered convention, and every year it gets pushed aside. This may be the one time where this actually happens. Not necessarily brokered, but that this conversation, if it's starting, it can't start the day of the convention. It has to start today.
But then Dems get a chance to bring the attention to their great bench and to put forward what America wants, which is change.
One last thought, and then we got to go.
I really might be underestimating up until this point Joe Biden gutting this out, and he could thank Donald Trump's playbook in 2016 and Bill Clinton's in 92.
We could see it. We wait with bated breath to see how it all plays out. Stick around, guys. When we come back, A Democratic president with low public approval ratings and a deeply divided country suddenly withdraws from the race. What his handpicked successor said in the summer of 1968. Our Meet the Press Minute is next. Welcome back. The rising Democratic pressure on President Biden to step aside has echoes of 1968, the last time a president decided not to seek a second term. That president was Lyndon Johnson. Weakened by the Vietnam War, Johnson had never formally entered the race and bowed out 5 months before the convention. He was replaced on the ticket by his vice president, Hubert Humphrey, who won the Democratic nomination but lost the general election. Vice President Humphrey joined this broadcast a day before the start of the Democratic National Convention.
President Johnson seems to believe that if he ran again, the country would remain divided and his move towards peace would be suspect. Now, in view of your close identification with him and the administration, why do you think that what applied to him doesn't apply to you also?
Because I have not been president. This is not to detract from President Johnson at all, but he has had to make the tough decisions, Mr. Spivak. It is President Johnson that has had to call the shots, so to speak, that has had to face up to the responsibilities of the management of our affairs. The Vice President of the United States does not do that. I knew when I became Vice President that we only had one president at a time, and that I ought not to act like the president, nor should I try to pretend that I'm president. I hope that I can go to the country, and I say I hope that I can go to the country and to unify it as best as possible and to lead this country to good performance, to higher standards. I think I can.
When we come back, Donald Trump claims victory after the historic Supreme Court ruling on presidential immunity. The panel returns next. Welcome back. The panel is still here. Let's talk about the big ruling in the Supreme Court, Stephanie, which basically gave presidents immunity over official actions that they take while in office. You obviously served on the January 6th committee. Your committee recommended criminal charges against former President Trump. What was your reaction to the ruling? And quite frankly, what are the implications, do you think, of this ruling?
Yeah, you know, the context for me is that my family and I escaped political persecution when I was just a baby. So I know what a government that is unaccountable will do to its citizens. And I sat on the January 6th Select Committee and I saw how our institutions were tested. The ruling, the Supreme Court ruling, basically gives the presidency expanded powers and makes accountability through the justice system very difficult. So what that means is that, one, we have to elect presidents with character and values and morals that align with this country. But we also have to, in this particular election, hold the line in the House. The House is now the last place that can hold a president accountable, and that makes this election critically important.
Matt, you know, former President Trump is taking a victory lap, obviously, because it means his court cases will be delayed. But Democrats are pouncing on this. They are making the case, look, this is why Donald Trump will be more dangerous in his second term. That's the Democrats' argument. How do you think this plays out or factors in, if at all?
I keep coming back to the fact that in the background of all this saga around Joe Biden is that Trump has had probably the best 10 days he's had since he was elected president. You know, you look at the debate, plunging the Democratic Party into crisis, but the SCOTUS rulings around Chevron, immunity, but also, again, what that means for the sentencing. That was always the albatross, the sentencing between now and the convention. It's off the table for now, at least. The VP will be a positive newsmaker, and I think, you know, he has stayed out of the headlines this last week and let the Democrats self-immolate. And look, this, I think, in large part, has been the best-run campaign apparatus he's had in his 3 times he's ran for president.
Yeah. Amy? Yeah. What do you think the
There's no doubt about that.
Politically?
Politically. I mean, the discipline is actually quite remarkable.
The Biden team acknowledges it, by the way.
Right.
I mean,
that they really were hoping that he would come and make a story so that the focus could get off the president. I agree that this should have been a week where we started the roundtable with the Supreme Court case, and instead we're ending it, which tells you all you need to know about how difficult it is going to be for Democrats to make this case to the voters.
Kristen, some of the most interesting comments the president made at the rally on Friday were about this. He said President Trump really could be a dictator on day one. He said we have to politically exile him because of this immunity ruling. He talked about Project 2025 as well. The problem is they were overlooked because of where the focus is. And this is what Democrats are saying. Back to your earlier point, the debate was supposed to put the spotlight back on Trump, and it's only really on President Biden right now.
Someone said to me that the immunity ruling is going to be the new Dobbs ruling, that Democrats are just going to continue to hammer it. Matt, we got to talk a little Veep stakes. Obviously, just talked to Senator JD Vance about a range of different topics, including this immunity issue. We know that he is on the short list. We know this decision has to come soon. Senator Vance said, no, he hasn't gotten that call from former President Trump yet. Where do you see this heading?
I mean, Vance did a great job this morning. He'd be a very formidable candidate. And, you know, one thing we haven't talked about is he has a military background. He'd be the only person out of the 4 VP and president nominees with a military background. And if Biden is going to make the case about Trump and veterans like he has in the debate and since, Vance could be an effective rebuttal for that. And so he's someone who comes in these scenarios, isn't afraid to do Sunday shows, and is able to get a message through. And he's impressive.
You know, Stephanie, it's interesting. I mean, he's viewed as the future of the MAGA movement. I guess the question is, can he appeal to independents, to moderate voters? Can he win those critical voters who are going to be necessary to ultimately win the White House?
I thought he was very good on your interview with him. He makes some of the more extreme policy positions that he is espousing seem normal because of the way he delivers it. And I think he fits the part for what Donald Trump looks for in a vice president. He looks the part.
Do Democrats fear a Trump-Vance ticket, do you think?
I think they are so focused on trying to figure out who their ticket is going to be right now.
Okay.
That's step two.
Fair point. That's a fair point. Amy, how do you see?
I mean, I think that for Trump, so much of this is, as we talked about, the look, but also is sort of softening Donald Trump, or at the very least, somebody who can come in and look like they could keep him in line, not worrying about, you know, his sort of going off track. And this is the person who could do that. That's where Doug Burgum, I think, because of how low key he is, he seems he's not getting in fights with anybody. He is coming from a very different perspective in that way, could be a better pick.
All right. Convention's 1 week away. Mike Memoli, quickly, how long, one word answer, will it take before President Biden makes a decision?
This is a consequential week for him. His team knows that. They've been giving him some tough advice that's coming from the outside. The question is, are they themselves hearing it?
All right. Great conversation, you guys. Thank you so much. That is all for today. Happy July 4th weekend. Thank you so much for watching. We'll be back next week because if it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.